God bless all of you, pastors and leaders from around the world that's participating this morning. It is my joy and honor to be with you and just to share briefly and what God is doing in the Middle East. Recently, September 14th through the 24th, myself and a team of apostolic leaders from around the country visited the nation of Lebanon, as we recognize through a colleague in Boston who's a Lebanese pastor, what was going on there with the church. And so we planned a trip there, and I'll just give you a few insights, what I saw, what I learned, and maybe encourage your heart a little bit with what God, I believe, has begun to do there. So we got to Lebanon, and the cry of the people, even before we got there, the pastors were asking us to come and unite them. There is such a need for unity, and I think it's so appropriate, even as I listened to Bishop Garlington share this morning about this. This is the cry, because I believe that what we want to see God do in our cities and nations begins to happen at the place of unity. I think we know for ourselves, Psalm 133, it's very vividly describes a picture of unity, and it says, it is there that God commands the blessing. It is there. I believe it is so true for us as well, as we are believing God for our blessing over our nation and cities, that the church must come together to shake and bring down the strongholds that divide and gives the enemy a foothold in the nation. So we went there with that in mind, and I believe the first night we opened with a dinner, a reception. We brought 55 churches, pastors from across every denominational spectrum, and government officials together, which was a first for the evangelical church there. And the message we wanted to bring right away was that we come with no political agendas, but we came to serve the nation, and specifically to come alongside the pastors in that nation and to wash their feet, to serve them in the most humble ways possible, rather than come in as, hey, the Americans are here, we've got the resources, we've got the answer, everything is going to be okay. It's that colonial mentality. We wanted to shift from that attitude and to simply let the pastors know we were there to serve them. And so that just opened their hearts to us. That just opened the door for us to really minister and serve. The following 2 days, we did a conference that drew about 200 people. I think 60% of them were young people. And that was also encouraging, because I believe they're the future of the nation. I want to say that the church in Lebanon is the hope. It's the only hope. Government really right now is almost non-existent, and they're doing nothing for the people. It is the church that's addressing the needs of the poor and the suffering there. And one pastor told me that you cannot do church anymore in Lebanon if you expect people to show up unless you're giving aid. So it is important that the churches there are well supplied, that they can continue, because this has also become the key to reaching some of these Muslim families, some of these displaced Hezbollah people that are coming across the border from Syria and flooding the city of Beirut. This is the way we're reaching them now, through the distribution of food. So there is that element, and we could talk more about that. And we also saw and were encouraged by the young people's presence in the conference. Sunday evening, we did an evangelistic crusade that drew over 1,000 people. The altar call, I can't even count. I would say at least 200 people responded to the altar call. It was just overwhelming. And I'll tell you, the people in Lebanon are hungry. They are hungry for God. I could hardly leave the auditorium without people coming out of their seat and prostrating themselves in front of me, pray for me, touch me, do something, lay hands on me. But you could not speak in any church. You could not stand up and even give a greeting without then having to pray for the people, because they're just so hungry for God. And so those were encouraging signs. But the church really needs unity. It's interesting that I spoke separately with 3 different pastors, and each of them said, I have the biggest church in Beirut. And I think that's kind of gives you a sense of what the spirit is there and why God needs to break that spirit of independence and pridefulness, because I believe that, it's no longer about the size of your buildings or your budgets or anything of that sort. I think what God is doing now is really based on the character and the hunger and the level of desperation that we have. I think God's going to pass a lot of people by because they think the size of their building qualifies them to be the leaders in their city. God will raise up obscure people from nowhere and surprise many of us. And I see God doing that in Lebanon. Another part of our mission was to deliver care packages, which we sponsored. I raised quite a bit of money along with several other pastors, and we had care packages that were put together for Syrian refugees. And we spent a day delivering. I wish I could show you some of the pictures, but the people there are just so grateful for us and for our presence. One of the significant things that happened, and I think everything that happened for us was a huge surprise, big. But one of the things that happened there for us was the president caught wind of our presence there and what we were doing and invited us to come to the presidential palace. And this was another first, that a team was able to go in and visit with the president in his chambers. And shortly after we visited with the president, we did a press conference, and that was on national news. Now, what that did was it just raised the profile of our presence there and just added such tremendous credibility to our mission and what we had come to do, such that the response now in Lebanon is they want us to come back. Now, we had planned to go back in 6 months, but they've asked some of us to return by the end of this month and to do a one-day seminar to bring the pastors together. They have been the victim of bad theology, I think, as many of us on this side have. And what I want to say about that is I think that it's time for the church to jettison the negative views, the negative eschatological expectations. We cannot pray with conviction for the church and even to pray for the nations until we begin to understand that God's plan, that his kingdom has come and it's going to come in its fullness. And God does not want the church to give up or relinquish territory, but to press forward and to continue to take territory for him. And so there's a huge cry in Lebanon now, even more since we left, for unity. I woke up Thursday morning to my phone going off on WhatsApp with messages coming in. And when I woke up and looked at it, it was 4:30 in the morning. There were video clips coming in with an uprising in Beirut of things. There were several people, 10 people were killed, about 50 wounded. And my friend there, Pastor Shadi Ilawad, was telling me about what is now happening there. And I've been back and forth dialoguing with him and 3 other pastors there. And I've encouraged them to begin to meet together and to begin to cry out to God. Because I believe nothing is going to happen until they begin to pray together as pastors, to humble themselves, come together, and to begin to cry out to God. And so yesterday they held a meeting and they said over 50 churches were coming together to cry out to God. And I believe this is the beginning of what I believe God is going to begin to do to turn the tide for Lebanon. Last thing I want to say, and this is significant, and I would invite you guys to pray about this, is that Lebanon is the key to the Middle East. I think many people think that Israel is, but I believe Lebanon is. Why? Because Lebanon is the only nation in the Middle East that you can still preach the gospel freely without being persecuted. Lebanon, not Israel, not any other nation, not Egypt, Lebanon. And so Lebanon has a key role to play because the gospel is able to reach from Lebanon to other parts of the Middle East freely. My friend, Pastor Shadi Alawad, has raised up many churches in the Middle East, Syria, and Egypt, and in Lebanon. And we've supported him over the years. And I know of the harvest there and the great return we've had on our investment. So I want to encourage you to pray for this small nation of 4 million people outside of Lebanon. There's 12 million Lebanese around the world, but the nation itself is 4 million. And there's the key to the Middle East. If Hezbollah should have its way, if we should forget Lebanon, and if we should not pray and support and come alongside them, Hezbollah is pushing its way into Lebanon. America is not intervening, and so they feel forgotten. In fact, the Lebanese Christians are the most neglected Christian group in our known world. And they're asking our brothers here in America and the Western world to remember them, to pray for them. and to come to their aid. Amen. So I wanted to leave that with you. There's so much I could say, but God has begun to open doors for us. The president has also requested another sit down with us. Some of our leaders are going back there at the end of the month. And so we think that some things are beginning to unfold by way of partnership and the government recognizing that the church has a key role to play. I want you to also cover this in prayer, because this is a rare opportunity and a rare open door for the church to grab a hold of, I think, some prominence, and to be given some space by the government and perhaps resources to be the hands and feet of Jesus. The evangelical church, the Pentecostal churches, and the vibrant churches there are the only ones that I saw feeding the hunger. One pastor, that one of our host pastors, his church alone at the time was feeding 1,800 families, not people, families. And so that's just an example of how much responsibility falls in the lap of any particular church. So there's a great need for resource, but it's so important to understand the role that resource has played, because this is how we're reaching and seeing some of these Hezbollah Muslim families come to Jesus Christ. If we can have another conversation, but I didn't want to take up more time than I needed to. And so again, my closing thought here is that Lebanon is the church rather, is the only hope for Lebanon. They are the only ones doing the work, the caring for the poor. And this is their open door. And they need our prayers and they need our resources. I leave with that Jesus says, upon this rock, I'm going to build my church. He is building the church, and he's building the church in Lebanon. And we need to get excited and pray and see how maybe God can have us have a role, even if it's just to intercede for Lebanon as we go forward.